Few family dramas have ever blindsided audiences the way Little House on the Prairie did. Marketed as wholesome frontier storytelling, the series often delivered emotional devastation without warning. Parents expected comfort. Children expected warmth. Instead, certain episodes delivered grief, violence, death, assault, disease, and psychological trauma that lingered for decades. This is a ranked countdown, from emotionally heavy to generation-defining trauma. We begin at number 7. 7. Sylvia. When Sylvia aired in 1981, it permanently altered the perception of what Little House on the Prairie was capable of portraying. The story centers on Sylvia Webb, a shy teenage girl who befriends Albert Ingalls. At first, the tone feels tender. Awkward young love, innocent flirtation, schoolyard teasing. Then something changes. Sylvia is attacked in a barn by a masked assailant. The scene is tense and frightening. The camera avoids graphic imagery, but the terror is unmistakable. This is not implied danger. It is assault. For many viewers, especially children who had grown up with the series, this was a seismic shock. The show had dealt with death, illness, violence. But this was different. This was sexual assault portrayed in a program marketed as family entertainment. The trauma unfolds slowly. Sylvia becomes withdrawn. She avoids Albert. She hides the truth. When she finally confesses what happened, the emotional impact is devastating. The show treats the subject seriously. There is no sensationalism, only pain. Then comes another blow. Sylvia is pregnant. The implications are enormous. Shame, fear, isolation, judgment. What the town's reaction reflects the cultural attitudes of the era. Sylvia bears the burden of stigma, despite being the victim. For young viewers, this was likely their first exposure to the concept of rape and its consequences. It forced parents into difficult conversations. It forced children to confront realities they may not have understood. And then the episode escalates further. Sylvia dies after falling from a ladder in a desperate attempt to escape her attacker. The death feels abrupt, cruel, unfair. But the story does not end there. The identity of the masked attacker is revealed to be a respected member of the community, a man in a position of trust. That revelation lands like a punch. The message is chilling. Predators can hide behind normalcy. 6. Plague, Season 1. But before the series built its reputation for devastating personal tragedy, it introduced something more primal: fear of invisible death. Plague arrives early in the show's run. Walnut Grove is struck by an outbreak of typhus. At first, the illness feels distant. A cough here, a fever there. But slowly, panic spreads. Quarantine is declared. Families are separated. Supplies are rationed. Suspicion grows. For children watching in the 1970s, this episode hit differently. Disease was not a monster you could see. There was no villain to fight, no dramatic showdown, just uncertainty, waiting, watching someone you love burn with fever and not knowing whether they would survive. The trauma here is psychological. Laura is trapped inside. The town is isolated. The camera lingers on sweat-drenched faces and anxious glances, where the tone shifts from pastoral warmth to suffocating dread. The show's musical cues soften. Silence becomes louder. Then comes the emotional hook. Charles Ingalls rides into danger to retrieve medicine. The idea that a father might not return plants a seed of anxiety in young viewers. Suddenly, the show is not safe. The adults are not invincible. The episode also quietly teaches a brutal frontier truth. Survival was fragile. A microscopic organism could wipe out a town. While no major character dies, the tension feels life-threatening. Children watching had rarely seen a family show portray epidemic terror with such seriousness. There are no jokes, no light relief, just dread. In retrospect, Plague traumatized not through shock, but through atmosphere. It introduced viewers to a disturbing realization. Even in a show about family values, catastrophe could strike without warning. It planted the first seeds of mistrust in the safety of Walnut Grove. And that would matter later. 5. The Lord is My Shepherd, Season 1. If Plague introduced fear, this episode introduced grief. This two-part story centers on the death of baby Charles Jr., the Ingalls family's infant son. For many young viewers, this was the first time they saw a baby die on television. Not implied, not glossed over, not softened. The episode opens in warmth. The baby is sick, but hope remains. Then comes the quiet devastation. The child does not survive. The trauma is not in spectacle. It is in the aftermath. Laura cannot process the loss. She believes the death is her fault. She prays. She bargains. She imagines alternate realities. In one of the series' most haunting sequences, she dreams of climbing a mountain to speak to God. The imagery is surreal, lonely, desperate. For children watching, this was destabilizing. Television had rules. Babies did not die. Families always recovered quickly. But here, grief lingers. Michael Landon's performance as Charles is restrained. He does not rage. He collapses inward. His quiet sorrow feels real. The family does not instantly heal. The trauma here is existential. The episode forces viewers to confront a spiritual crisis. Laura questions faith. She questions fairness. She asks why God would allow suffering. These are adult questions placed in a child's mouth. And the show does not offer easy answers. The mountain sequence in particular left deep impressions. Laura climbing alone, wind howling, more a symbolic journey toward understanding. It felt mythic and terrifying at the same time. For a generation raised on tidy moral lessons, this episode was jarring. Grief did not resolve neatly. Faith did not eliminate pain. It was many viewers' first encounter with the idea that tragedy could strike the innocent without explanation. That lingers. 4. The aftermath. When Little House on the Prairie decided to feature the real-life outlaws Jesse James and Frank James, the series quietly crossed into darker territory than most viewers were prepared for. At first glance, the aftermath feels like a Western adventure. Mary Ingalls unknowingly befriends a charming stranger recovering from an injury. He seems polite, soft-spoken, intelligent, the kind of man you would trust. That is what makes the episode so disturbing, or because the audience slowly realizes before Mary does who he really is. The dread in this episode builds gradually. There are no immediate explosions of violence, no screaming, no fire. Instead, it is psychological tension. Mary's innocence is weaponized against her. She confides in a criminal without knowing it. She shows compassion to a man capable of murder. For young viewers, this was a new kind of fear. Until now, danger in Walnut Grove usually came from storms, illness, or obvious villains. But here the threat wears a friendly face. The message is unsettling. Evil does not always look evil. The trauma comes from the tension between knowledge and ignorance. The audience knows who this man is. We know what he has done. We understand the risk. Mary does not. That imbalance creates sustained anxiety. The episode also avoids sensationalizing the violence. Instead of gunfights and dramatic showdowns, it focuses on moral unease. What happens when kindness meets cruelty? Can empathy survive betrayal? When the truth surfaces, the emotional fallout hits harder than any physical confrontation. Mary's trust is shattered. The idea that the world is morally simple dissolves. For children watching in the 1970s, this was sophisticated and frightening storytelling. It suggested that the frontier was not just harsh, it was morally ambiguous. There is also a subtle shift in tone throughout the episode. Lighting becomes harsher. Conversations feel weighted. Silence stretches longer than usual. The show stops feeling like a warm family story and starts resembling a quiet thriller. The aftermath traumatized audiences not through gore, but through disillusionment. It planted a seed of suspicion. It taught viewers that even in Walnut Grove, darkness could arrive disguised as charm. And once that illusion of safety cracks, it never fully returns. 3. Bully Boys. If the aftermath introduced psychological dread, Bully Boys delivered something far more direct: intimidation and implied sexual violence. This episode centers on a group of rough outsiders who move into the area and begin terrorizing the women of Walnut Grove. They leer, they harass, they threaten. The atmosphere shifts from pastoral calm to suffocating menace almost immediately. For many viewers, especially women and girls, this episode felt terrifyingly real. Unlike disease or outlaws passing through town, these men are embedded in the community, where they linger, they stalk, they intimidate. Their presence alone creates tension. There is a constant feeling that something terrible is about to happen. The trauma here is rooted in vulnerability. Walnut Grove has always been portrayed as a close-knit town where neighbors protect each other. But in Bully Boys, protection feels uncertain. The women are targeted specifically. The threat is personal, physical, humiliating. There are scenes in this episode that feel far harsher than typical network television of the era. The tone is grim, uncomfortable. The menace is not stylized. It feels grounded. Young viewers watching with their families were confronted with a reality many parents had shielded them from. Harassment exists. Predators exist. Justice is not immediate. Charles Ingalls eventually confronts the bullies, but the buildup is prolonged. The anxiety stretches. You feel the imbalance of power. You feel the fear of the women in town. And perhaps most disturbing of all is how ordinary the antagonists appear. They are not cartoon villains. They are not exaggerated monsters. They are men who exploit intimidation and numbers. The episode also subtly explores the limitations of frontier law enforcement. Authority figures are slow to act. Protection must come from within the community. For children watching, that message was destabilizing. Adults do not always fix things quickly. Sometimes danger lingers. The emotional aftermath of Bully Boys sticks because the threat feels plausible, real, close to home. Many viewers have recalled this episode as the moment they realized Little House on the Prairie was capable of going far beyond comforting moral tales. It could confront social ugliness head-on. And when it did not soften the blow. 2. I'll be waving as you drive away. Few episodes of Little House on the Prairie altered the emotional direction of the show as permanently as this two-part arc. Mary Ingalls begins losing her eyesight. At first it is subtle. Headaches, blurred vision, sensitivity to light. She hides it. She pushes through. She insists she is fine, but she is not fine. The diagnosis is devastating. Scarlet fever complications have damaged her optic nerves. The blindness is permanent. What makes this episode traumatic is not sudden catastrophe. It is inevitability. The audience watches Mary slowly lose her world. Colors fade, faces blur, independence disappears. There is a moment when she tries to read and cannot. The silence in that scene feels heavier than any explosion. The camera lingers on her panic, on denial, on anger. Children watching learned something terrifying here. Some losses cannot be fixed. The emotional collapse in the barn scene between Mary and Charles is one of the most painful father-daughter exchanges in television history. Mary screams. She blames him. She blames God. She begs for a miracle. Charles cannot provide one. That helplessness transfers to the audience. The trauma also lies in the realism. There is no magical cure, no sudden recovery. The show commits to permanence. Mary will be blind for the rest of the series. For young viewers who saw television as a place where problems resolved neatly by the end of the hour, yet this was destabilizing. It forced acceptance of long-term suffering. There is also social isolation layered into the episode. Mary fears being a burden. She fears being unwanted. She withdraws emotionally before she withdraws physically. The title itself is heartbreaking. I'll be waving as you drive away. It is about separation, about watching life move forward while you remain behind. The episode redefines what tragedy looks like in a family show. It is not dramatic spectacle. It is quiet life alteration. Many fans say this is the moment they cried hardest watching the series, not because someone died, but because a future died. And that feels just as final. 1. May we make them proud. If the previous entries unsettled viewers, this episode shattered them. A fire breaks out at the blind school. Smoke fills the building. The panic spreads. Children scream. Adults scramble to rescue them. The sequence is chaotic and frightening in a way the series had rarely attempted. But what happens next is what sealed this episode's place in television history. Mary's baby is trapped inside. Alice Garvey runs back into the burning building to save the child. Neither survives. For a show long associated with warmth and moral lessons, this was brutal. The fire itself is intense. Flames engulf the structure. The camera does not look away quickly. The danger feels immediate. Then comes the aftermath. Mary collapses into grief. The image of her realizing her child is gone is one of the most devastating moments in the series. There is no soft music to cushion it, just raw anguish. The trauma for viewers was layered. First the terror of fire, then the death of a baby, and then the death of a beloved adult character. Network television rarely combined those elements in a single hour during that era. Parents watching with children were forced to confront heavy themes without warning. The episode does not retreat into comfort afterward. It lingers on sorrow, on guilt, on community shock. The title itself feels like a memorial. There is something uniquely traumatic about watching a child die in what had been marketed as a family drama. It violates expectation. It forces viewers to recalibrate what kind of show they are watching. For many who grew up with the series, this was the episode that proved Walnut Grove was not protected by narrative safety. Anyone could be lost, even babies. The fire sequence remains one of the most frightening scenes in the show's run, but the emotional fallout remains one of the most painful. This was not just dark storytelling, it was generational heartbreak. And yet it is still not the most controversial episode the show ever aired. Because there is one story that pushed even further. In Part 4, we confront the episode that many fans consider the single most disturbing hour ever broadcast under the banner of a family series. An episode so shocking, it redefined the boundaries of what was acceptable on network television. What makes these episodes so traumatic is not just what happened. It is where they happened. Walnut Grove was supposed to be safe, warm, predictable. The Ingalls family represented moral certainty in an uncertain world. When tragedy struck there, it felt personal. These episodes did not rely on spectacle. They relied on emotional realism, on blindness that never healed, babies who did not survive, assault that was not softened, fire that did not spare the innocent. For many viewers who grew up watching Little House on the Prairie, these stories were their first encounter with grief, injustice, and moral complexity. They were painful, but they were unforgettable. And perhaps that is why they still haunt a generation.